Saving is an essential part of any long-form game, allowing the player to take a break and come back to the experience later, without having to redo everything. In my experience, most games these days take advantage of autosaving, a feature where the game will save itself every so often without the player having to do anything. With this, at just about any point, you could turn off the game and come back to it at about the same place you left it. Many games also feature a manual save option where the player is able to choose when to save, though it's also not uncommon for a game to not allow the player to do that, instead opting for a persistent world where the player's actions cannot easily be undone. Hello world, my name is Atticus and welcome to the experiment. Save systems within games have grown alongside the games themselves. Originally, games didn't have saves. The arcade design ethos opted for short but difficult games, something that a player could, in theory, beat in a single sitting provided they had the requisite experience to overcome the various challenges. That or games that didn't provide new content but rather greater challenges, like the ever-quickening ghosts of Pac-Man. But as games moved from the arcade to the home and hardware became more and more advanced, it became possible and reasonable to create longer games with more in-depth narratives. But now a player could not feasibly beat a game in a single sitting, even with the experience of beating most of it beforehand. This is where the save system comes in. The first was password-based. Instead of having a save file containing all of the things a player had done, after beating a boss or a level, the game would give them a password, and on the start screen there would be a menu to enter passwords. Enter the correct password and you would start back up from wherever that code came from. As hardware continued to advance and the available space and memory increased, we were able to get the manual save systems we're more familiar with, such as can be seen in Pokemon, where the game allows the player to choose when to save within certain constraints, be it the use of an item, a specific location, or just not being in the middle of a battle. The save data could be stored in the game cartridge. The earliest use of this involved having a battery in the cartridge that fooled the game into thinking it was constantly running, thus allowing it to hold on to the quote-unquote saved data. Or the saved data could be held on the console via a memory card or an internal hard drive. The next major innovation in save systems was the autosave, and that's pretty much where we're at today. Save systems more or less operate in the background. But just because they can go largely unnoticed doesn't mean that save systems don't have an impact on gameplay. Mostly, save systems have controlled the flow of a game, when and where the experience stops and picks back up. In Stardew Valley, the game only saves when you go to sleep for the night or pass out at 2 a.m. More accurately, the game saves during the change from one day to the next. This system provides a clear stopping and starting point, and because a player can choose to progress to the next day at just about any point, the player is in charge of how long their play session lasts. Conversely, in a game like Persona 5, while the player can save outside of cutscenes most of the time, they can't save inside a dungeon, except for in certain rooms. Long cutscenes aside, if a player wants to stop playing Persona 5 while in a dungeon, they either need to backtrack to a save point or progress towards the next one. The save points tend to divide the dungeons into distinct sections, allowing for that clear stop and start, but at the cost of player agency. With autosaves, a player is able to stop a game at basically any point and jump back in later, having lost little, if any, progress, provided the autosave feature is implemented in such a way. This goes fully with player agency, abandoning any hope of providing clear stop and start points. Those still exist in the game, say beating a boss in Dark Souls, but the save system does not enforce it. It's possible to implement both, have the game autosave every so often, and present players with manual save cues, but I think most games these days opt to just autosave, allow the player to save whenever, and leave the save system in the background. And that's fine, but it doesn't really bring the most out of this incredibly important system. I'm not sure how to bring the save back to the forefront of a gaming experience, or even if that would be a good thing, but I have seen some interesting implementations of the save system, and I think they're worth talking about. The one thing these all have in common is that they tie the save system into the lore of the game, which isn't an easy feat considering how gamey a system saving is. Hello world, my name is... Wait, we've done this already. Well, I'm talking about diegetic save systems now. If we're talking about tying saving the game into the events and lore of the game itself, then Undertale is the first game which comes to mind. Undertale opts for save points instead of autosaves, prioritizing story flow over convenience, but it also recognizes saving as a power which the main character has. Most characters are unaware of when the game is saved or reset, but a few acknowledge it, and one even possesses the same power, granted to a lesser extent. A lot of Undertale is built around how the player will interact with the game, tying various systems directly into the world without any sort of translation, but that won't work for most games. Going back to Persona 5, saving the game is translated as recording events of the main character's life into a diary. By committing it to the diary, the player cements it as reality. If the party wipes, the player can't write to the diary anymore, and that version of events can't become the reality for that playthrough. Games like Dark Souls, however, commit everything to reality, autosaving frequently and mercilessly. The idea of a single persistent world and that sort of save system work well together. There's no quick saving to wreak havoc in a version of the world that will swiftly cease to exist. If you kill an NPC, there's no taking back that decision without starting an entirely new playthrough. But if there's an act of saving that the player can do in those games, it's resting at a checkpoint. Dark Souls, at least, always saves when the player rests at a bonfire. One other thing happens at bonfires. The world resets. Enemies that were defeated return, and the player character recovers all their health, as well as uses from the main healing mechanic. In Dark Souls, you might interpret that as the bonfire both healing the character and filling up the Estus flask. Perhaps Estus is liquid bonfire or some such. And since the rest of the world is also undead, the amount of time it takes for this healing process to happen is the amount of time it takes for everything else to respawn and amble on back to the spots they've decided to stand in for the rest of eternity. So, as to speed things up for the player, that time is instant, but it doesn't have to be within the game, especially since there's a subtle transition screen within which any amount of time could hide. Surprisingly enough, however, I'm not here to talk about Dark Souls. Instead, I want to talk about Jedi Fallen Order. This game learned a lot from Dark Souls, as well as a few other games, and implements a similar persistent world and checkpoint system. But the in-lore reasons for returning to a meditation spot don't work as well as they do in Dark Souls. Jedis are, more or less, mortal beings. If Cal, our main character, falls off a cliff or is eaten by the local wildlife, there's not a good explanation as to how he ends up back at a meditation circle. So I have written 1,400 or so words of preamble just to provide my own reasoning. Welcome to the Star Wars theorizing portion of our show. I think there is a good explanation. The game doesn't provide it, but it does lend evidence to support it. We know that the Force, that nebulous idea of magic in the Star Wars universe, can give visions to those sensitive to it. Cal is able to sense the history of an object by touching it, and his master, spoilers, realizes that something bad is about to happen just as Order 66 is given, allowing him and Cal to survive for a bit at least. To explain death in Jedi Fallen Order, we just have to assume that anytime Cal dies, it's actually just a vision of a possible future given to him by the Force, a sort of don't do that from the universe. They're called meditation circles after all. Cal is the most in tune with the Force when you are resting at a checkpoint. There's actually a philosophical thought experiment among the same veins called Laplace's Demon. The idea from Pierre-Simon Laplace posits that if you knew everything about everything in the universe, the position and trajectory of every atom, you could predict the future. More accurately, you could calculate the future. In order for such calculations to be useful, though, you would have to do them faster than they happen in real time. Taking a second to predict a second in the future wouldn't be terribly useful, unless you're impressing your friends with knowledge of something in another room. Also, the bit about knowing the state of everything in the entire universe. Such a being able to know everything and predict future events in a moment would have to be a demon, is, I imagine, the reasoning behind the name. Cal is not this demon, but with the help of the Force, something which is ostensibly connected to everything in the universe, he might be able to see the possible realities between meditation points, and what he would have to do to avoid dying between point A and B. Saving doesn't have to be an overt process. It can happen entirely in the background at no detriment to the player. But bringing something which is so very much a video game element and forcing it to have a place within the game's world is a fun challenge which can produce interesting results. It's easy enough to just have the game autosave and keep a persistent world, or give the player multiple save files to do with what they will, but I personally enjoy it when games do more with their background systems, and I think it should happen more often. I've been Atticus, and thank you for participating.